Hello everybody, this is Mr. Moffin coming at you again with another APGov video. This is taking a look at topic 5.7, groups influencing policy outcomes. Now last time we talked about different types of interest groups that exist out there, be it economically based or based on certain social movements. Be aware of some other types of interest groups that also exist. Some of these interest groups, interestingly enough, are interest groups that represent certain levels of government. For example, you have what's known as the National Governors Association. And so as the name implies, it is made up of governors and institutions that are needing assistance from the federal government. And so you have this interest group lobby on behalf of governors to Congress to try to provide, for example, grants and other types of aid to states. You have the U.S. Conference of Mayors that does the same thing, but except for municipalities. So I know it's kind of strange that you've got interest groups that represent some parts of government that exist to lobby and influence policy with other levels of government. Interesting. But you also have certain interest groups that represent certain specific careers and professions. So, for example, you have the American Medical Association, the AMA, that's representing doctors. For example, the AMA has fought tooth and nail to prevent socialized medicine in the United States, claiming that if you socialize medicine, if you have a single-payer system, doctors would not be able to have a profit margin that would be worth the time and energy and cost of getting a medical degree, and the overall quality of medicine would go into decline. You also have the American Bar Association. No, the American Bar Association is not representing bartenders, but rather lawyers. So this is a group, for example, that plays a critical role in the rating of those that wish to be federal court justices. If you have a high ABA rating, that's really in your favor. If you don't have an ABA rating that's really high, that's not going to help you too much. Of course, don't forget that think tanks play a critical role in what interest groups are able to promote in terms of policy goals and ideas. Be mindful that many of these interest groups are ideologically based, be it on the conservative side like the AEI or the Heritage Foundation, Cato, or maybe on the more liberal side, Brookings, Human Rights Watch, etc. So be mindful. Think tanks are the groups of academics that exist either in certain policy areas or on certain ideological, leans that craft policy ideas, be it to try to address climate change, international tyranny, displacement of jobs, pandemics, whatever. Think tanks exist to try to solve those solve those issues that require good policy. Now, notes, many of these interest groups, are able to provide for more membership due to what they can provide for folks besides good policy. For example, you have the AARP, which I've got listed down here. The AARP is a very, very powerful interest group. There are millions of Americans that are in this, the American Association of Retired Persons. And note, they are powerful not just because they represent the oldest of Americans. And technically, if you're over the age of 50, you can become a member of the AARP. And we know the older you are, the more likely you are to vote regularly, which already gives you tremendous power and influence over members of Congress. But to help kind of bulk up what the AARP is able to do in terms of bring in membership, reduce the free rider problems and stuff like that, they have done a really good job, and many other interest groups have tried to emulate this by, providing all sorts of benefits for joining their group. Benefits aside from policies that actually are beneficial to them. Like, for example, if you look at this AARP website here, you can see how members are able to get discounts for car rentals and discounts on cruise ships and airlines and hotels and resorts and all sorts of things like that. I mean, you can see this list goes on and on and on. So the idea being is that, well, why should I join this group? Well, besides the policies that might be, important to you, as in this case, someone that's, over the age of 50, there's more tangible things that you can also get as benefits. If you join AAA, that's an interest group that is looking out for motorists. But most people join AAA because they get the roadside assistance benefits. So, just kind of keep that in mind. Also be aware that when we do talk about these big national interest groups, not all members are treated equally. It's kind of like political parties in a similar sense. There tends to be an upper class bias in interest groups, like there does tend to be in political parties, because money talks. And those that have the most money to donate, and note, there's virtually no rules to donating money to an interest group, unlike what there are for political parties. And so if you are willing to donate $1 million, you're going to have influence over what that interest group wants to do, which can be problematic if you're talking about an interest group that might represent a broad cross-section of people. If you're talking about, now, for example, should now be looking out for the interests of wealthy women or working class women, so things like that. Be aware that there are also interest groups that exist not to represent a certain ideology or to represent a certain policy issue, but really are just interested in good governing. You have Common Cause, for example, that what they try to focus in on is trying to have cleaner governments, making sure that regardless of who's running government, Democrats, Republicans, whatever, that it is corruption free. If you're looking at this list of, single issue groups, we've talked about many of these already. The NRA, looking at, supporting gun rights. Be aware that, they tend to lean pretty far to the right most of the time. AARP, we know, is very powerful because of their membership numbers and their propensity to vote at high numbers on election day. Christian Coalition, we've talked about before, a broad-based conservative group that is trying to promote traditional morals rooted in Christianity. One that we haven't mentioned really before is the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. This tends to be more left of center than right of center, but as the name implies, they exist to make sure that people have the ability to have unencumbered civil liberties, like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, protection from unreasonable searches and seizures, things like that. Also be aware in America's history the impact of certain interest groups and individuals that have played a role on American policy, both on the right and on the left ideologically. For example, if you take a look at the feminist movement of the 1960s and 70s, you see many women flocking to now the National Organization of Women that's going to be playing a critical role in the promotion of trying to close the gap in terms of equal pay based on gender, trying to break down traditional norms and expectations of gender roles in society, trying to take away the notion that women exist as sexual objects for men, all those kinds of things. So we see this happening on the left, and so you see now having a tremendous influence on the Democrat Party, but at the same time, you also have, individuals like Phyllis Schlafly pictured here that will have a tremendous influence on Republicans, conservatives, on the other side of the feminism issue. One of the goals of feminists now in the 1970s is the passage of something known as the Equal Rights Act, or excuse me, the Equal Rights Amendment, which was designed, as the name implies, to basically make no legal distinctions between men and women. Now, granted, we already have the Civil Rights Act and Title IX prior to this, but those are simple pieces of legislation which could be undone with a simple majority vote in Congress and the president's signature. We know constitutional amendments are much harder to overturn. And so as you saw feminists on the left promoting the Equal Rights Amendment, there were some women, like Ms. Schlafly pictured here, that's going to use her influence to try to kill ERA. She starts the Stop ERA movement, which is pictured on her shirt there. She is going to be tremendously powerful and influential by gathering a massive mailing list and phone list. And in a time before you had the internet and social media, to be able to have thousands of names, phone numbers, addresses that would be likely donors and likely supporters and people that could be activated and motivated to protest and write letters and all that kind of stuff for a particular issue, she's going to be able to tap into that. And her work that she's going to be doing in conservative circles is actually going to be successful in killing ERA. ERA does not get the necessary number of states to ratify it for it to become part of the Constitution. Additionally, if you look at the right, you've seen more modern examples of, groups that are trying to influence the major parties. You have the Tea Party movement of the 2010s. Now, the Tea Party is not an interest group per se. It's not a formal organization, but it does have, clear policy goals. And they try to lobby folks in Congress to address those policy goals. A lot of the Tea Party was, to a certain degree, libertarian. As you can see, these, folks dressed up right here. It's about, keeping taxes low, keeping entitlement spending low, things like that. So, understand you don't have to be a formal interest group per se to have an impact on trying to influence policy. You also have seen on the right, historically, the impact of environmental groups, such as the Sierra Club. You can see here, these are folks in the 1960s that are protesting against, air pollution at a time before you had the Clean Air Act and before you had the EPA. At a time when, for example, the Cuyahoga River was so polluted with chemicals, it literally caught on fire in 1969. So, these groups have been important on the left, putting a tremendous amount of pressure on Democrats to try to enact certain policy goals. So be aware that interest groups, can have very important, significant effects historically. All right, we'll leave it there for now. We'll see you next time.